All right, I'd like to welcome you to today's video lecture on schizophrenic disorders. First, we'd like to start today with the description of what the word actually means. Today in class, we talked about schizo being the Greek for split. Phrenia would refer to our mind. So the split in this case refers to a loss of touch with reality. Do not confuse this with dissociative identity disorder, also formerly known as multiple personality disorder. There you have a lot of times what people refer to as split personalities, but this is a completely different disorder here. So a loss of touch with reality. Let's look at some of the main symptoms now of schizophrenia. The first and foremost is probably the hallucinations. A hallucination is basically a false visual or auditory stimuli. It does not exist. So hearing or seeing things that aren't real. Oftentimes the hearing component take the form of voices, giving orders. Sometimes we call these the command hallucinations. These hallucinations or these command voices can involve self-harming types of behaviors or causing harm to others as well. Another trait that you will see here as a result of these voices is the disorganized speech. Oftentimes, you may have a situation where the individual is having a conversation with their hallucination, possibly even at the same time they're having a conversation with a real-life person. So you can imagine the difficulty in following that person in terms of their speech, as they may be having two separate conversations, but you're only witness to one of those. So the speech can end up being disorganized as a result. The other main symptom of schizophrenia is the delusional component. A delusion is a false belief in spite of invalidating evidence. So even though every fact points to the contrary, they may still hold true to this belief. These beliefs also often involve situations where they feel like they're being controlled or persecuted, oftentimes by their hallucinations. So a scenario might be an individual who's hearing voices, but they believe that these voices are aliens from another planet who are attempting to control their mind of some sort. Or they are seeing forms of a being that represent some paranoia, so something that's out to get them. But again, these beliefs are not true. They're not based in reality. We mentioned the disorganized speech in a prior slide. This is what we call some of the positive symptoms of schizophrenia. Now, by positive, we don't mean that they're good in nature. What we mean is that they are added on to one's behavior. So when someone's suffering from schizophrenia, you will see these added on. The disorganized behavior, okay, the disorganized speech that we talked about. Behavior that's inappropriate for a situation. So the bizarreness, perhaps wearing a sweater and an overcoat on a steaming hot day. Or maybe their control or lack of control over emotional responses. So they'll laugh at a serious thing, cry at a funny thing. Again, the disorganized behavior. We mentioned in your personality disorder discussion the other day, schizotypal personality disorder. Very similar here. But again, the schizophrenia also involves the hallucinations and the delusions. Now let's look at a couple types of schizophrenia. First type we're going to look at here is what we call catatonic. When a person is in a catatonic state, they're basically unresponsive to their surroundings. They may have movements, but it's oftentimes very aloof, purposeless, parrot-like speech. Oftentimes what happens is the severity of the disorder gets to the point where the individual just cannot respond anymore to their environment, and the result is this catatonic state. Probably the most common or the most widely known is the paranoid schizophrenia. This involves the delusions of persecution. So once again, the belief that people, things are out to get them. Now, This also is very similar to paranoid personality disorder, but the key difference is this. With paranoid personality disorder, I may feel that people are out to get me, but those people are real. So maybe my family, my friends, my teachers, etc. In the case of a paranoid schizophrenic, the people that are out to get them are not real. May not even be people. Might be animals, aliens, something. So the delusional component, the hallucinatory component of this paranoia is what differentiates schizophrenia from paranoid personality disorder. Like we said, they oftentimes believe that others are spying and or plotting against them. And these others are not real. Another type of schizophrenia, if it cannot be categorized into one of the other two, we have a category called undifferentiated schizophrenia. So this is a case, again, where it may not be paranoid, may not be catatonic. They display symptoms of schizophrenia, but we're not able to categorize it in one of those other two. Let's look now at some of the causes of schizophrenia. We do know that the risk increases with genetic similarity. So the lifetime risk of developing schizophrenia go up if you have a relative who is also schizophrenic. You can see here the comparison between the general population, siblings, fraternal twins, children of two schizophrenic parents, and then identical twins. Schizophrenia is a disorder that does have a pretty solid foundation in biological basis. We know that situations can occur during the birthing process. If it was a difficult birth, perhaps there was oxygen deprivation during the birthing process. Some type of viral infection, perhaps while the baby's in utero, prenatal infections can play a role. We also know that the brain structure of an individual plays a role in how the brain functions and operates. People with schizophrenia have been found to have what we call enlarged cerebral ventricles. These ventricles are basically the spaces between the wrinkles and the folds here in the cerebral cortex, the outer shell of the brain. They have reduced neural tissue around these ventricles. So the result here is that we also see some reduced frontal lobe activity. The result is what you see here in these scans. The scan on the right is an individual with schizophrenia. Your ventricles, you can see here, are enlarged. Basically, there's a lack of tissue in those areas, as we mentioned, versus here where you can see the ventricles are not. Now, no one knows exactly why this happens, but we do notice that that happens in individuals with schizophrenia. Another culprit that we look at here is the neurotransmitter dopamine. The idea here is that excess amounts of dopamine are also found in brains of schizophrenic. We know that drugs that reduce dopamine also reduce the symptoms of schizophrenia. Drugs that increase dopamine tend to produce symptoms even in people without the disorder. So drugs like cocaine, amphetamines, many of your stimulants, we see these types of hallucinatory, delusional type behaviors. So the conclusion here, the theory is anyways, that schizophrenia has a direct link to excess levels of dopamine in the brain. But again, this is a theory. There's evidence that does show contrary to this theory, but it is something that we look at as having some degree of certainty. All right, this concludes our lecture today on schizophrenic disorders. Please be ready to ask any questions you have in class, and we'll be observing some case studies as well. Thank you.